Alright, so we're back, of course, talking about some Final Fantasy VII. So I recently seen over on Reddit somebody asking about whether or not we'd see a Dirge or Cerberus remaster or port at some point, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's an interesting discussion, but more so about the entire compilation, because there's at least 3 games that need a damn port, like Before Crisis, Crisis Core, and Dirge Cerberus, of course. So that's something we haven't really talked about too much on the channel. We've definitely discussed it here and there in other videos, but as per usual, we've never done like a dedicated video about it. I did a video about like a Crisis Core fan-made remaster like maybe a year or so ago, which is absolutely fantastic, by the way. This shit is absolutely beautiful, and if it, back then, hopefully still now, is entirely free. And within that video, I definitely would have talked about, why hasn't Square Enix remastered Crisis Core yet? So it's something we've discussed here and there on the channel. As for whether or not the compilation will ever get ported or remastered, it's kind of hard to say. We do know with like the upcoming like PS Plus membership thing, I still don't even entirely know the details on. They're gonna have PSP games, so it's possible that we could finally get like that Crisis Core port. Finally, it doesn't even have to be like an HD remaster. If the game still looks exactly like this, dude, I am perfectly fine with it. Just give us the goddamn game on modern consoles. That's all we give a shit about. And when it comes to a game like Before Crisis, I don't entirely know how you do it. This is, of course, a mobile game from back in the day, but this is also back whenever phones had buttons, which modern phones don't really have anymore. So you just simply have to match like the directional buttons that you would use on a phone to the directional pad of a controller, and you probably only need like 1 or 2 buttons to like progress dialogue, maybe choose shit in menus or whatever the case. I don't remember entirely how the gameplay works in this game, and that's probably all they would need to do in terms of being able to play the game. It's just a matter of actually porting it, and whether or not they still have the source code, which Square Enix has had problems with source code in the past. I believe they lost the source code when it came to Final Fantasy IX, but they eventually fixed it. If I'm not mistaken, they also Kingdom Hearts 1. Which they had to like reverse, like develop it or engineer it to like be able to port it eventually to other consoles. And I think that was the rumor for the longest time. I don't know if it's true or not, or proven or not, with like Final Fantasy VIII. Why it took so long for that game to get a port and a remaster and stuff is because of a source code issue. So what are the odds that they saved the source code for Before Crisis, right? Like, and maybe the same situation when it comes to Crisis Core and Dirge Cerberus, because it really doesn't make sense that those games haven't been ported yet. For one, Square Enix loves the shit out of them some money, but also some Final Fantasy VII. Like, Final Fantasy VII is always going to be a massive moneymaker for them. So if they would easily be able to port those games to other consoles, there's really no reason why they shouldn't have already. So maybe they have lost the source code and it'd be such like a task to port the games maybe. I don't know. About 5 years ago, back in 2017, whenever they were kind of still talking about Remake, and Remake was obviously not out yet, Nomura did an interview with Silicon Era where they were talking about the possibility of remastering some of the games in the compilation. And in regards to Remake, Nomura said at the time that those compilation games wouldn't have any overall cohesion when it comes to Remake, because obviously we know now, all these years later, because we have Remake in our hands, the Remake's incorporating some aspects from the compilation. So those games wouldn't make a lot of sense in terms of Remake story, but that also itself doesn't make any sense because nobody's asking you to remaster these games because of Remake. Remake was revealed in 2015, 8 years after Crisis Core had come out. People had already at that time been asking for years for some sort of a port to like other consoles and probably PC as well. Same with Dirge Cerberus, right? It has its fans. I'm not mentioning Dirge Cerberus that much in this video, but obviously it's in the discussion here too. It came out around the same area, different platform, of course, PS2 versus PSP. But still, people have been asking for like ports of these games for so long before Remake even existed, man. So it has nothing to do with what the conversation is. We just want those games to play them. Because as it stands right now, putting emulation aside, of course, because you can emulate pretty much any game out there, you can only play these games on hardware. Like, you have to buy a PSP and a copy of Crisis Core to play it, or you gotta have a PS2, buy a PS2, buy a copy of Dirge Cerberus to play them. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. Those games are so old now, dude. We're creeping up on those games being 20 years old. In just a handful of years, those games will be 20 years old. How have they not been ported to something yet? Speaking of emulation, and this may be a stupid question, you guys could correct me in the comments if needed, but could Square Enix not just like download a ROM of their own game if they don't have the source code? Like, could they just not just download that off the internet and then somehow find a way to put it onto other platforms if like the source code issue is such a problem? I don't know how hard that'd be. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. Like, could they not just sell the game only digitally, like download the ROM and find a way or whatever to like put it on the PlayStation Network? I don't know. That makes sense in my head. Maybe it doesn't make sense to people who know what the fuck they're talking about, because I don't. The other sort of elephant in the room when it comes to the discussion of them porting the compilation is that we have Ever Crisis on the horizon. At some point, I don't know, we're damn near halfway through the year at this point, we still haven't heard shit about the game, but it certainly exists somewhere out there. Somewhere out there, this game is floating in the ether. I just don't know what's going on. It's so weird that we haven't heard anything about it. But regardless, this game exists, and it's going to be retelling the compilation story. Everything, right? Before Crisis, Crisis Core, Dirge Cerberus, FF7, Advent Children, also some new stuff. So while we obviously want the actual games themselves, you can make an argument for whether or not we need a compilation, since this is going to be kind of doing what those games do, if that makes any sense. But speaking of Ever Crisis, my dudes, at this point I would be accepting of mobile ports of these games if that's what they want to do, if they just don't want to port it to consoles for some goddamn reason. And as much as I don't want that, the games would actually work pretty well mobilely. Like with Dirge Cerberus being a third-person shooter, that'd work perfectly fine. It'd be kind of wonky, maybe if you're not used to it playing shooters on phones, but it could work. Crisis Core was obviously made for a mobile console with the PSP, and Before Crisis was made for mobile phones to begin with. So I think all three games could work mobilely. It's not necessarily what I want, but at this point, I would take anything. These are always such strange conversations to me every time I talk about like why aren't games being ported or remastered or whatever the case, because regardless of the effort it might take, like the reward's going to be way better, right? Like no matter how long it takes them to, like, maybe they lost source code, the rewards are obviously going to be worth the effort, because something like Crisis Core getting a remaster or a port to modern consoles, whatever you want to call it, like that's going to sell probably a couple million at least, right? 1, 2, 3+ million, just because how long people have been waiting for that shit. You bring it to PC, it's going to sell even more. And with Before Crisis being this like obscure mobile-only game from way back in the day, I think it was only in Japan, if I'm not mistaken, like I just want to play that. Like it's so interesting to me of a concept. I've watched Let's Plays and gameplay of it and like breakdowns of the story and shit, but I want to play it myself because it's just such a weird game. And I've never played Dirge Cerberus. I've mentioned that several times on this channel. I would love for that to get some sort of modern port, mobile, consoles, whatever, just so I can play Dirge Cerberus, dude. And that's part of why I am looking forward to Ever Crisis. Even if it's not those exact games, I still get to play those stories that I never have got to play, right? We could emulate. We could have emulated years and years ago if I wanted to. That's not what I want to do. I want to actually play this shit. I want to own it. Play whenever I want to. Play it on console, play it on my phone, whatever. Again, it's just weird to me. Like, we're all desperate to give Square Enix our money. They don't have to build a game necessarily from the ground up. They just gotta, they don't even have to remaster the games. Just port the motherfuckers to consoles, and we will buy them from you. We're desperate to give you our money, and Square Enix is just like, nah, I'm good. I don't want your money. That's what a stupid concept. Taking money from people. So when it comes to the conversation of whether or not we're ever going to see ports of these games, Before Crisis, I think it is a very hard one to say, because I just don't know if that is a type of game that would ever get ported to anything. If it did, I could definitely see it being like maybe mobile only. The other two could obviously, Crisis Core Dirge Cerberus could obviously come to console or mobile or both, whatever the case. I just don't know that it will, especially with something like Ever Crisis existing. That being said, though, it took them 20 years before they remastered Final Fantasy VIII, right, and brought it to like modern consoles, so it's not impossible, right? Those games are at this point like 15, 16 years old or something like that, if I'm doing the math correctly in my head. So it's certainly a never say never situation. I just don't know. It's the pain demand's been there for a very long time and it hasn't happened yet. So there's got to be a reason. And before people say that they can't do a Crisis Core remaster because of GACT and Genesis and all this other shit, like there's no confirmation that that's ever even been a thing. There's conflicting stories online, but also we've seen a picture of Genesis directly from Crisis Core in First Soldier, so clearly they've been able to use the character however they want. It's their goddamn character anyways. They can do whatever the hell they want with it, regardless of GACT. But my dudes, that is going to be pretty much the video pass off to you guys. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you think we're ever going to see the compilation games ported to anything, even if that's just the mobile console, mobile platform? But also, what do you think is the reason why we haven't seen these games ever ported to something? Do you think a source code issue could be the problem, or is it something else entirely? My dudes, that is of course the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't even said more Final Fantasy VII content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. I'm a Discord. Links to the networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.